What's up, everybody? Welcome into the latest Windy City Gridiron Radio. With you, as always, managing editor Robert Zaglinski. And today we're going to talk the 2018 49ers, one of the final pieces of our Bears opponents preview for this regular season. I know we're winding down towards roster cuts and all of that other fun stuff, but we still have some of these guys to get through. Luckily, we have one of SB Nation NFL's editors and producers, and he also runs Niners Nation, David Fucillo, to help us break everything down, to help us break Jimmy Garoppolo's perfect smile down, all that kind of fun stuff. David, what's up?
Hey, what's happening? Always here to talk about the ever handsome Jimmy Garoppolo.
Incredibly handsome Jimmy Garoppolo. In fact, that's probably the most notable part. We won't even really talk about football, right?
Well, I would actually say the most notable part is that he's from Illinois. He's a Chicago area.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. Northern Illinois. He went to NIU and then. Yeah. No, I forget that. I forget that sometimes.
He went to Eastern Illinois.
Oh, Eastern Illinois. Okay, yeah.
Actually, 49ers cornerback Jimmy Ward went to Northern Illinois.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I forget that. Sometimes I get lost in his eyes, and it happens, you know.
I mean, it happens. I will say that really, it's the jaw is what really gives away the Chicago. And he and his entire family have these rock solid jaws that just look like, they are just straight out of Chicago.
We're going to talk more Jimmy in a little bit. The first part I wanted to discuss, David, we're entering the second year of that Garoppolo era, of that John Lynch era, second full year. In your mind, how have expectations changed?
It's interesting. I know we'll get into Jimmy Garoppolo a little bit, but obviously expectations certainly relate to the addition of Garoppolo. It's been a year and a half now. When Lynch and Shanahan first took over, I think people were cautiously optimistic. They figured, okay, Shanahan's the up-and-coming coach. Lynch had no experience, but he was very good with the media. He talked a good game. And so, people felt pretty good. You get through the first draft, things are feeling pretty good. Then the team starts 0-9. Everybody doesn't know what, you're still trying to say, okay, everything's going to be fine. We knew this was going to be bad. And then everything really changed on October 30th. I think it was the 30th when they traded for Jimmy Garoppolo, just because he was one of the big name options. It was going to be, there was a lot of talk that the 49ers would make a run at Kirk Cousins because he's a Kyle Shanahan guy. Mm-hmm. But they added Garoppolo, and suddenly it's like, well, wait a second. He had 2 starts to his name. He played pretty well, but he's a Tom Brady guy. He's worked with Tom Brady. He's worked with Bill Belichick. Everybody, that changed everything. That changed how everybody felt. Nobody was ready to anoint him quite then, but suddenly it's like, oh, wait a second. Suddenly this team is a little more interesting.
So would you say Super Bowl hype is warranted? Because I've seen that, and just I have to say, from an objective perspective, like, I'm not totally bought in going into the second year despite the sample size. I mean, I can see the pieces. I can see how everything's pieced together. How are you gauging that?
Well, I mean, he's never lost a start, so I mean,
so he's going to go into. He's actually going to go. They're going to go 19-0. Yeah. Okay.
Not just that. He's never going to lose a game in his career. That's what the projections say. Yeah. No. Honestly, I agree. Super Bowl suggesting that they're going to go to the Super Bowl is way out of line at this point. Yes, if you get to the playoffs, anything can happen, but I think they're kind of in that middle gray area where they will be competitive every week, but saying the Super Bowl is a little tough. You're looking at a team, the over-under is set at 8.5, and that's about a perfect number because I can't really tell you one way or the other whether it's going to go over or under. I see kind of a 7 to 10 win range. If everything goes great, 10 wins make sense. If things go poorly, 7 wins make sense. I mean, obviously they could technically do worse than that or technically do better than that, but I see sort of 7 to 10 wins, which makes them competitive, makes them a playoff contender, but not a Super Bowl contender.
With Lynch, aside from the Garoppolo trade, what have you appreciated about it so far? It's still so early, right? But what have you liked so far about his approach as GM and the things he's been able to accomplish aside from the trade?
Well, I mean, you could talk, you could point to successful drafts, some interesting free agent additions, stuff like that. But, every GM is going to have their misses to go with their hits. So I think beyond just, hey, he's hitting on this guy or that guy, is changing the culture. And really, this is kind of a combination of him and Shanahan, because Lynch is technically the GM, but it really is a partnership, and that's kind of a cliche, but I think Shanahan is a guy who has a lot of say in this and in terms of the roster. And we've seen this, we've seen a lot of turnover. There's only, I think, 12 players left from before the team hired Lynch and Shanahan. So clearly there's a big roster turnover, but really it's been a change in culture. You had a team that after Harbaugh left, they were just kind of wandering in the desert for a couple of years there with Jim Tomsula, with Chip Kelly. Trent Baalke was just not working out at GM, and there were just, there didn't seem to be a focus or a mission or anything like that. You suddenly add, Lynch and Shanahan have brought some kind of focus. It's hard to put into words exactly, but it feels different.
I have to ask because obviously a lot of people in Chicago will be bothered by it, but I have to ask just from an objective perspective, what was the San Francisco viewpoint on the whole little? I don't know. I don't know how to word this perfectly. Like the Ryan Pace, like John Lynch getting one over on Ryan Pace in the 2017 draft. What was that whole viewpoint like?
You mean like the moving up to Solomon Thomas? You guys get Trubisky.
Mm-hmm.
I think knowing that the 49ers had no interest in Trubisky, it's a great deal. Since then, and you can make of it what you want. Shanahan has said basically their two quarterbacks. The two quarterbacks that they were targeting after Shanahan and Lynch came on board were Kirk Cousins and Jimmy Garoppolo. They asked Belichick about Garoppolo at the combine. Were shut down. So really, the plan was to go heavy for Kirk Cousins this past offseason. So in that context, them knowing that they were not going to draft one of those top quarterbacks, you have to love the trade. Solomon Thomas had his ups and downs last year. I think he's going to take a step forward this year. How much remains to be seen. Personally, I think, the Bears wanted Trubisky. Clearly that was their guy. And, well, who was number one that year?
Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett of the Browns, yeah.
So, they wanted Trubisky. They needed a quarterback. Personally, I think that it was a perfectly fine trade. If you think that you can get a quarterback, if you think there's a quarterback there that's going to be your guy for the future, you do almost anything for it. And so I don't begrudge the Bears that decision because, hey, it may not work out, but in terms of process, I think it's fine.
Yeah, and for the 49ers, they got their draft picks anyway, so both teams got what they wanted. It was always interesting how that was like how the public perception of was that. But it's like you said, like if you go and get your quarterback, like it doesn't matter. If it works out, it doesn't matter. No one's people are gonna remember it anyway, but no one's gonna look back on it in that negative fashion if it works out. So you're taking that risk either way. To Jimmy Garoppolo's handsome smile and just getting lost in his eyes, as we were saying earlier, David. I know he's never lost a start. I know he's being anointed as a top 5, top 10 quarterback, which I actually quite frankly see down the line. But do you think it's a little early for him to be fully anointed without, fully getting ingratiated in the offense and with the weapons still coming around?
Oh, sure. Saying he's a top 5 quarterback now is kind of going out on a limb at this point. Unless you want to get your hot take in early so you can say, oh, I said it, way back when.
I said it when they traded for him. It was over there.
I said it 2 years before they traded for him. So there. No, I think that he could finish this year as a top 10 quarterback. I don't think that is a crazy suggestion.
Yeah.
It's a lot of it comes down to the offensive line and the run game and, kind of the support that he gets. Also, obviously, the defense needs to step up so that he's put in positions to succeed. But if at the end of the year we're talking about him as one of the top 10 best quarterbacks in the NFL, I think that's reasonable. I think, and, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it's hard.
I could see it. But
I could see it. It's hard to say. Like you said, there's not a lot there. Yes, he looked great in 5 games. There are plenty of people, there are sticklers that'll be like, well, hey, the Rams weren't playing their starters. The Jaguars technically didn't really have a whole lot to play for in that game. The Texans didn't have J.J. Watt, so on and so forth. So I'm fine with that, and I think those are reasonable points to make. But, you know, I think this is a team that if you look just overall, if you look at the 49ers as a whole, last year I think they lost 5 games by a field goal or less. They had a stretch during that 0-9 period where they lost 5 straight games by less than a touch or by a field goal or less, I think it was. And that's the kind of thing where luck could turn that around a little bit. If they improve in the red zone, that'll help. So, I'm not here to say that Jimmy Garoppolo is one of the best quarterbacks in the league, but hey, it could happen sooner rather than later.
So you're basically saying he's the next Joe Montana and Steve Young, essentially.
He's Joe Montana plus Steve Young combined.
Oh wow! Okay. Oh wow. We don't shy away from hyperbole here.
No,
no, sir. What? So where to become that elite quarterback, to become that star quarterback? Again, you don't have much to work off of, David. But where does he have to improve? What's the next step in his progression?
I think
if you can answer that I know it's a difficult question. I
think his decision making is still something that needs work. Technically, if you look at his interception rate plus, like there was at least 1 or 2 dropped interceptions. It was among the worst in the NFL given his 5-game stretch. I think it was something like it was like down there with Trevor Siemian, so it wasn't good. But and then if
another Illinois product, Trevor Siemian, yeah,
they're everywhere. Illinois it dominates the NFL. But I think for those that missed the 49ers Colts game this weekend, in the second quarter, in his last drive of the second quarter, the 49ers had like first and goal or second and goal, and he threw 2 passes, one which wasn't going to be an easy interception, but when the defender got his hands on it, and the other one just bounced off the defender's chest, and so. That I think decision making. I think he does a lot of things really well at this point. There's things he can improve in plenty of areas a little bit here and there, but decision making is going to be something where this comes with more time. The more you play, the more experience you get, the more situations. It's like, okay, now I know. I can't do this in this situation. I can't force this in that situation. So I think decision making is going to be an area he needs to improve.
He can't get any better looking, though. I mean, at that point, he's plateaued. That's what we can agree upon.
That's what you get when you work with Tom Brady, I guess.
This is Windy City Gridiron Radio. You can follow us on Twitter at WC Gridiron, talking with SB Nations and Niners Nations. David Fucillo. You can follow David on Twitter at David Fucillo, Fucillo, and follow me on Twitter at Robert Zaglinski. David, what is one underrated area that people don't talk enough about the 49ers roster in your mind?
Honestly, I think the wide receivers. It's a position where right now your top, the 53-man roster will probably include Pierre Garçon, Marquise Goodwin.
I'm always sorry to interrupt. I'm always amazed that Pierre Garçon is still in the league when I hear his name. Like I feel like he's been around forever. That's one of those players like, oh, he's still playing. Oh, he's still productive.
I see him like an Anquan Bolden type.
Yeah, exactly.
But Pierre Garçon, Marquise Goodwin, Trent Taylor. You've got Dante Pettis, their second-round pick this year. Kendrick Bourne was an undrafted free agent who looked pretty good. Stuff like that. You've got some of these guys. Pierre Garçon, like you said, is a guy. He's a guy that's managed to hang around, continue to be productive, but he's not that guy that's like, oh man, that's that clear number one. Marquise Goodwin last year had a breakout season after 4 years in Buffalo, where people thought he was just a go route guy. But I think that's a position group that actually is going to be a lot better than people expect. I don't know that you're going to find. But Goodwin is the guy that will end up as the best of that group this year.
Mm-hmm.
But none of those guys are people that are jumping out at you like, oh man, I really need to draft that guy in my fantasy draft. They're the proverbial better football player than fantasy player. Trent Taylor's entering his second year. As a rookie, he was a dynamic presence on third down. He was a guy that Jimmy Garoppolo looked to on third down. So, they're not big names. I mean, Pierre Garçon technically is still sort of a big name, but, they're not really big names. But I think you're looking at a group that is going to be a lot more productive than people expect. And if Jimmy Garoppolo takes a step forward, part of it will be having a solid group of receivers.
What is one area that concerns you, like an Achilles heel of sorts?
The pass rush is a big question mark. the 49ers have invested heavily on the defensive line. In 2015, 16, and 17, each year they invested a first-round pick on the line. They drafted Eric Armstead out of Oregon in 2015, then DeForest Buckner out of Oregon, and then Solomon Thomas out of Stanford, going for those Pac-12 guys.
Going for that Northern California, Pacific Northwest.
Exactly. Exactly. Stay on the coast, and they have had plenty of question marks about them, but they have not invested heavily in their edge rushers. They play a 4-3, but obviously they spend more time in their nickel. They got Cassius Marsh off of waivers from the Patriots. They signed Jeremiah Adachu this year from the Chargers as a free agent, but they really just haven't done a whole lot with that group. And so, I think there's a lot of potential on that line, but I don't really know if they've done enough to improve the pass rush this year, which – With a secondary that's relatively young plus Richard Sherman, it's hard to tell what's going to come of that group.
Is the thought process that where they're just so strong at do the 49ers run a 3-4?
No, they run a 4-3.
So is the thought process where just that Buckner and Thomas are just so good and get so much pressure up the middle where everything else is mitigated, or is the roster just in that early stages where you can wait another year or two to mitigate this essentially, where it probably wasn't going to be fixed this year? What was that thought process?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think they want to see what that line can do independent of a big name pass rusher.
They're Khalil Mack, right? Trading Khalil Mack.
They're going to trade all their first round picks for Khalil Mack. Clearly. But I think the idea is that the defensive line will open things up and make it easier for the edge rushers, so they don't need to necessarily invest big names in it. And it looks like, if you look at Robert Saleh, their defensive coordinator, who comes out of the Seahawks system, that's not a group that's really had a lot of big name edge rushers. It's always been, it's been a little bit more about the defensive line and opening things up. So that's my guess at what they're hoping for. Whether that actually works remains to be seen, but that's kind of where I see them looking for this to develop.
Obviously, the Rams had a big offseason. Just going all out, getting a bunch of defensive superstars after their breakout last year. The Cardinals have a young quarterback now they can build around, still some good defensive pieces. Seahawks, it's Russell Wilson running for his life, but he's very good. So in your mind, what is it like for the 49ers now? What are they going to have to do to stay competitive in what looks like a gauntlet of a division?
Oh, I think the Rams are the team to beat by a long shot. Adding Ndamukong Suh and the rest of those defensive players is going to be huge for them. I think if they don't win the division, it will be an upset, and so I can live with that. The Seahawks, I think Russell Wilson always gives them a puncher's chance, but they're not technically in a rebuilding process, but they're kind of moving into a rebuilding process.
Like they should be, but they're not yet, essentially. Yeah.
Because they've got Russell Wilson, and you can't give up seasons as long as you've got him. And I think, like I said, as long as they've got him, they can technically. They're competitive and can win any game that he starts, assuming he doesn't get hurt. And with that offensive line, it's always a question mark. That's up in the air. But then also just that defense. It's, there's a lot of turnover there. They're changing their approach, less Legion of Boom, more up front. So, I think for the 49ers, just Jimmy Garoppolo, really I think it's going to come down to the offensive line and the defensive line. The offensive line can keep Jimmy Garoppolo protected, and if the defensive line can get some pressure, second in the division is entirely reasonable. And again, if they don't finish second, I think that if they don't finish second or first, that would be a disappointment.
So would you consider the Seahawks to still be like the four? Because I know there was that big rivalry in the earlier this decade. Is that still the 49ers' main rival in the division, or has it just shifted to the Rams because the Rams are the top dog now, or is it even the Cardinals? I
think it's switching to the Rams. I think the Cardinals are just sort of the Cardinals.
They're just there. That's so okay. Yeah, they're just there.
They've just never really been like that dynamic. Yes, they went to the Super Bowl, this and that, but it's not like they've ever really been like that big high profile team. The 49ers fans and Seahawks fans still have a rivalry for sure, but I think in terms of the players and the games, the 49ers and the Rams is going to develop back into the rivalry it was back in like the 70s and 80s. And part of that is the Rams are the top dog, but also you've got that relationship between Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay. They work together in Washington, so you've got a lot there. And so I think that's that's going to be a fun rivalry these next few years.
To a guy that was a part of when the Seahawks and 49ers rivalry was at its peak, David, let's talk the 49ers free agency. The biggest name was Richard Sherman. How has he looked so far? I mean, he's coming off an Achilles. He's making that an Achilles injury. He's making that switch. How has he looked in camp? How has he looked in the preseason? What are your expectations?
Expectations are hard to really gather right now. I think, same as I said before about others, it's like kind of cautiously optimistic. He was back for the start of training camp from the Achilles, and then he pulled his hamstring and he missed the first 2 preseason games. So Saturday against the Colts was his first preseason game of the year, and I'm guessing the only one. I don't expect him to play this Thursday against the Chargers, but he played the first half. He looked fine. He was targeted once and had a pass breakup against Justin Rogers or whoever. One of some random wide receiver, but he looked fine. There was a play in training camp where he got burned by Marquise Goodwin, but he talked about they're doing a lot of different things. They're trying out some things. I think until we see him out there in the regular season, week 1 is when we'll really start to get an idea of, okay, this is what Richard Sherman is right now. Either he's a guy who's lost a step, or he's a guy that can bounce back from that Achilles injury. I think once we see what happens in the Vikings game, we'll have a better idea. I think there's a chance he'll be a little rusty, but he's been practicing. He's been back on the practice field for most of the past week and a half or so. So I think that's the game when we'll really be able to tell what this year might mean for Richard Sherman.
This might be a little bit of an arbitrary question, but how do you think his how do you think his mentality's shifted in this kind of second phase of his career and trying to revitalize himself? How has he given any inkling to that? Like I said, that might be a little arbitrary, but obviously this was a guy that used to be one of the league's star corners and stuff, and he's trying to get back to there.
Yeah, I think one thing that's been interesting is he's come in is the leadership role he served. I mean, he was outspoken with the Seahawks, but I don't know enough to say that he was clear. He was the vocal leader of that secondary, but I kind of feel like Earl Thomas was probably more of the
better player. Yeah.
Well, but the quiet leader, the guy that I didn't say as much, but was more viewed as the quote unquote leader of the secondary. Whereas with the 49ers, obviously, he couldn't really do a lot of practice in the offseason workout program. He didn't even get on the practice field until the very end of minicamp. And so it was interesting. As soon as he came in, he started to work with the young, because the 49ers have a lot of young players on their secondary. They've got a second cornerback. They've got a second-year free safety, a fourth-year strong safety who's in his first, who hopefully will get a full season at the start of this year. But he's he's kind of been playing, he's been sort of that coach on, that player coach on the field, and then that leader off the field and the mentor that I don't know if he necessarily, and again, I can't say for certain, we'd have to ask Seahawks fans about this, but it feels like he's kind of taking on more of a role in that regard and viewing this as sort of his chance to really make his imprint from a different role. He still thinks he can play, he still thinks he can do all that, and that's fine. But I think more than anything, his leadership is going to be as important as anything with the 49ers.
He's probably going to want revenge on the Seahawks too, or self-motivated revenge of some kind, which will actually be really fun to see. The other big free agent signing, David, Jerick McKinnon. Expectations for him? How has he looked so far?
So he played in the first preseason game, and then after that he had a calf strain, and so he hasn't played in the preseason since. He's been getting pregame workouts and stuff like that. He's expected to be fine for week 1. I think once he strained his calf, they just were they basically were like, we're going to shut him down. No point. And so I think he's a guy that he's going to be the lead back, but I think Matt Breida, their other running back, their number 2, is I think going to end up being a pretty big part of that rotation. McKinnon is a guy that I could see him rushing for 800 or 900 yards, but then hauling in 700 or 800 receiving yards potentially. I think he's a guy that you're going to see a lot of him in the passing game. I don't know if he'll necessarily be the team's receptions leader, but he's going to be no worse than second or third in receptions on this team. I think you're going to see a lot of those, a lot of that shorter work. And so, they're not, people were talking about, they paid him all this money and this and that. But I think for a lot of systems, that was a lot of money, but for Shanahan's system, I think it makes sense. He's a guy that can get in there and do a lot of that short, a lot of work in that short passing game.
So what you're saying is, in Shanahan's system, he's going to be Roger Craig, essentially.
Pretty much. I mean, we're already beginning the proclamations for the Hall of
Fame. Let's jump over to the draft, David. Just doing all this offseason fun stuff. So, first round pick, Mike McGlinchey. You already mentioned Dante Pettis, Fred Warner in the third round, Tartavius Moore, Kentavious Street in the third and fourth rounds, DJ Reed. How has the draft looked so far? How pleased were you with it? All that good stuff.
Well, to throw you off even more, they drafted Tarvarius Moore in the third round, and then they signed Tarvarus McFadden as an undrafted free agent.
That's too much. That's too much name jumbling for me.
Yeah, the I is the key there. But no, so far it's looking good. There haven't been real games, so you have to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, yeah.
I think with McGlinchey, he's their right tackle. He's the guy they drafted him, and then they traded Trent Brown, who had been their right tackle. So they're gonna go through some ups and downs with him, just as you do with any rookie offensive lineman. But I think for him, the floor is pretty high. So he'll have some bad games, but I don't think it'll be too bad. Dante Pettis is one of the best punt returners in college football history. He set the record for most punt return touchdowns. I think he averaged 20 yards a punt return last year, or some ridiculous number. So you're going to get that from him, and then they're going to kind of work him around as a wide receiver, but he's looked really good with his route running. Fred Warner is interesting because Reuben Foster is going to be suspended the first two games, and so more than likely the 49ers are going to start Malcolm Smith and Fred Warner at the Mike and the Will position. And then once Foster comes back, I think Warner's going to see a lot of work in nickel, sort of a coverage guy, a guy that they can, they don't necessarily have to have a third cornerback. They can potentially rotate him in as well to kind of mix up their packages.
Yeah.
Tarvarius Moore played safety in college. He's moving over to cornerback. He's looked good. He's not going to be in the starting lineup. That's going to be Richard Sherman and Keller Witherspoon. Jimmy Ward is probably first off the bench, but I think Tarvarius Moore is a guy who will eventually replace him. DJ Reed, their fifth-round pick, is a nickelback, but he also plays free safety, and he's a guy that can handle kick returns and punt returns as well. So I think he's a guy you're going to see a lot of rotation on. He looked pretty solid as a nickelback in the preseason. What's really been interesting is their seventh-round picks. Julian Taylor, a defensive tackle out of Temple, and Richie James, a wide receiver out of Middle Tennessee State. Taylor has been playing the strong end position in their base 4-3. Eric Armstead, their 2015 first-round pick, is the guy that's going to start there, but he missed the first two preseason games with a hamstring injury, and so Taylor had done enough that he started getting the first team reps there, and so
so he's more than a day 3 pick, you think, or like than a typical day 3 pick?
Yeah, he's showing out really well. I think the big thing with him, one reason he slipped so far, is over the course of his 3+ years in college, he played like a cumulative one season of football just because of injuries and other things that it just cost him so much time, and so there just wasn't a lot of tape on him. But he's not going to be the starter this year, at least out of the gate, because Eric Armstead is healthy again, and he's the guy they're going to start there. But I think at the very least, he'll probably be inactive a decent amount, but he's a guy that they can slot in if there's any injuries. And then Richie James is a little guy. He's like 5'11", I think.
Generously.
No, he's 5'9", so he's a really little guy. Yeah. But he's a guy that you get him the ball in space and he can make things happen. They're going to get him some time as a return man, but I think you'll see him in a gadget role. When Kyle Shanahan was in Atlanta, Taylor Gabriel was kind of a guy that could move around in some different spots and get in. The goal was to get him the ball in space so he could make things happen after the catch, and I think that's what Richie James potentially could do. I don't think he's a lock for the 53-man roster, but I think he's done enough to get a spot, and again, you're going to see him utilized in a lot of creative ways.
Just to circle back to McGlinchey for a minute, Joe Staley being 33, do you think there's a plan to eventually shift McGlinchey over to left tackle after a few seasons or so as a long-term plan?
I think so. I'm not sure. I know there were questions about how well he would do on the left side. They were coming out of college, so I don't know what will happen with that. But I think I would imagine ideally they would want to move him to the left side at some point. Staley is signed for 2 more years. His status, is obviously up in the air. Once you get past, once you get to that age, it's kind of like, how much longer is he going to be around? But yeah, I think eventually they probably would like to do that.
Okay. Now, David, let's get to last time the Bears and 49ers met. It was Robbie Gould's revenge game. Scored all the 49ers points. And the team that cut him in 2016, Bears and 49ers, going to meet again in this time, I think, mid-December instead of early December. What is one area that, if you're the Bears, that you'd be worried about to like mitigate or to stop to this time win?
Well, it's
come out on top. Yeah,
it's crazy. I was looking. This is, I think, the 5th or 6th. This is like the 5th straight year that the 49ers and Bears will have met.
Yeah,
and I think the previous 4 years it was always in Week 13.
Mm-hmm.
It was which I've still. That baffles me. But yeah, no, this year, they're meeting in Week 16.
Week 15 or Week 16, I think it's like the 49ers like final home game or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's week 16, December 23rd, 49ers final home game. It's the final. They'll play. That'll be the 3rd of 3 straight home games to close out their home schedule. But, I mean, the Bears, I like the addition of Allen Robinson. I think they finally, it's good that they've got Mitchell Trubisky some weapons finally. Last year it was just kind of like, here you go, let's see what you can do. But Nagy obviously gets a lot of praise, and I think people like that. It's going to be interesting to see with Cohen and Jordan Howard. I don't know enough about the Bears defense to say what's
right.
I think that for me it's more about Jordan Howard and Tariq Cohen are that's going to be an interesting duo in terms of that run game, but also, Cohen seems to be a guy that can do a lot out of the backfield as a pass catcher. And, the 49ers are turning over their front 7 a lot.
I guess I should ask that. Is the run defense something that you're worried about with the 49ers against the Bears, I guess? Is that something that
I wouldn't say that I'm worried about it necessarily, just because I think the run defense is in position to be pretty strong, especially if Reuben Foster's healthy and on the field. I think I'm a little worried about like a guy like Cohen, who can hurt you as a pass catcher. I'm curious how the defense will handle pass catchers out of the backfield.
Right. Yeah, and an actual offensive coordinator that knows how to use them, as opposed to whatever it was in that game last year. Away from the actual tradition. David, I hate to I don't necessarily make a pick in August, but what would your expectations be out from this?
The 49ers are going to win.
They're going to run roughshod on the Bears.
They're going to win 50-0. No, as a home, honestly, I don't know. I think this is 49ers should win this game. I think that
I would agree with that, actually.
I don't think it's going out on a limb to say that at this point they should be favored and they should win the game. But as you know as well as I do, that we haven't seen enough
from the new iteration of this coaching staff with these Bears, so we don't exactly. But yeah,
and so it's tough to say. Like I think there's a group called CG Technology that releases gambling lines. For all for the first 16 weeks, which I always find funny. They don't release the Week 17 lines because they know that teams are going to be benching players. But it's like, well, we'll release Week 16, but we have our standards. But like right now, they project the 49ers as a 6-point favorite in that game, which is basically anything over once you start getting to 6 and above, it's like, okay, the line itself, as I think many people are aware, is more about what we think people are going to bet, because basically they want even money on both sides so that they win. But I think once you start getting into the 6 or 7 point area,
that's heavily favored, right?
What's that?
That's heavily favored.
Yeah. Once you get like I think 4 or 5 is like we don't really know. We kind of think the 49ers are the better team, but we don't really know what's going to happen. A field goal or less is kind of just like here, your guess is as good as ours. But once you get to 6 and above, but really, I mean, technically it's 7 and above, but 6 is close enough that I think they're like, okay, we think the 49ers are the team to beat. They're playing at home. This is what's going to happen. You know, this is what we think makes the most sense. And for the 49ers, they're a touchdown favorite against Arizona. They're a 6.5 point favorite against the Giants. And then the next biggest line is the Bears. So I think, and I would think, you know, Bears fans, aside from the most homerist of homerists, would not be shocked by that line at this point.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, looking at just by comparison, the 49ers in Minnesota are a 5.5 point underdog to open the year. So that's kind of, you know, try and compare it that way. What the 49ers are to the Vikings in Minnesota compared to what the Bears are to the 49ers in San Francisco. You know, kind of take that, you know, and sort of shuffle it around.
Yeah, that's definitely a fair comparison. Bears are winning 52-0 though. Let's just
I would have. That sounds about right.
All right, David. Just to wrap this up, so we're wrapping up the preseason finally this week. I think roster cuts are Saturday, but after that, we'll have Labor Day and we'll have everything else. How are you planning on spending your last free football days? I assume after roster cuts and everything's done that you'll actually be able to take a breather for a couple of days. How are you spending that last non-football weekend?
Yeah, I mean, you figure you got roster cuts Saturday, you got practice squad signings on Sunday because everybody loves that.
Whenever you can take a breather, you know, I imagine at some point you will. How are you spending that last real free time?
It will at some point involve probably going to the movies. You know, it's because once the season starts, it's hard to get to the movies. And I just saw Mission Impossible this weekend. I enjoyed that. That was really good.
I enjoy Tom Cruise just randomly sprinting 3,000 yards somehow.
He learned how to fly a helicopter to do a stunt.
Did he actually fly it? That wasn't CG or anything.
That is what I'm reading. That he learned how to fly the helicopter. I don't know if every aspect of that was full, but like he learned how to fly the helicopter.
I read on that sprint where he jumps out of the window that he broke his ankle on the jump. They stopped it and he just taped it up and everything. Took like a crazy amount of like Oxycontin or something, and then did the sprint. Apparently, that's maybe that's just they're just trying to add to his mythos or something. But that because that's the brand at this point. He does all his own stunts. He's gonna do everything for the scene. But if he ran however fast he was running while on a broken ankle, I don't know. That's pretty crazy to me. That's pretty crazy to me. That's almost like an NFL player playing through some kind of injury.
Yeah, pretty much. Or like, you know, like hockey players playing through broken legs.
Through broken legs or losing teeth or what have you.
I mean, hockey players are tougher than everybody else. So.
Well, of course they are. Of course they are. I was just saying, like, you wouldn't think of like an actor necessarily doing that. Like,
yeah, that's true.
Through a stunt. Yeah.
It's, you know what? It's Scientology.
More than likely, that's what gives them the strength.
Okay.
David, I know we've been like going back and forth on this for a while trying to get this up. I really appreciate you finally coming on, taking the time. A lot of good insight, buddy. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.
You can follow. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice here at the end. You can follow David on Twitter at David Fucillo. That's Fucillo. You can follow Niners Nation as well. Niners Nation, he runs that website. He's an NFL producer and editor for SB Nation proper. Follow us on Twitter at WC Gridiron. Follow me on Twitter at Robert Zaglinski. We're doing all this housekeeping. And as always, keep it classy, everybody.